I started noticing it in little things at first. Her hand not reaching for mine when we walked, the space between us on the couch that didn't used to be there. At first, I told myself it was just stress from work, or maybe fatigue from everything going on. She was working long hours, and I had my own plate full. It wasn't unusual to feel a little disconnected at the end of the week, but the more it went on, the more the silence settled in, and the colder it felt. The first real sign came one night, in bed. She turned away from me, curling up into herself like she wasn't even aware I was there. Her back to me, her breathing steady but distant. I reached out, brushing my fingers along the small of her back, hoping maybe she'd shift toward me, give some sign she still wanted me close. Nothing. Her body remained as still as if I wasn't there. I tried to write it off. Maybe she had a long day, or maybe I was just overthinking things. But that night, the emptiness in the air between us felt too thick to ignore. When I asked her what was wrong, she just muttered something about being tired. I didn't push. The next few days were more of the same. I'd come home to her already absorbed in whatever she was doing. Phone in hand, eyes not meeting mine when I said hello. The tension started to sit heavy between us, an invisible weight I couldn't shake. There were no more small gestures, no more teasing, no more laughter. I wasn't sure how to ask about it without sounding paranoid. I didn't want to push her too hard, but the silence, the distance, it was suffocating. I didn't want to think it was something deeper. I told myself it was just a rough patch. Everyone goes through them, right? But the more I tried to ignore it, the more the gap between us widened. It had been building for days, this tight, raw feeling in my chest every time I walked through the door and found her there, somewhere in the apartment, but not really with me. The house felt too quiet, too cold. So I decided to just ask her. I didn't want to overthink it. Just get it out in the open, confront whatever this thing was head on. "Is something going on?" I said one evening, my voice low, trying not to sound like I was accusing her. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, watching her push around a forkful of food she barely touched. She looked up, blinking slowly, like she hadn't even heard me at first. "What do you mean?" she asked, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, her eyes avoiding mine. "You've been distant. Cold, I guess. I don't know. Is there something wrong?" She shrugged, not a hint of concern in her face. "No, everything's fine." "You're overthinking it." I could feel my heart beating harder, faster. I wasn't overthinking it. I knew something was wrong. I just couldn't figure out what. I wanted to press, but I didn't want to push her too far. So I stayed quiet, waiting for her to say more, to give me something. When she didn't, I spoke again, softer this time. "I don't feel like I'm really here for you anymore. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but..." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine for a second, then back to her plate. "I'm tired, okay? It's nothing personal, but it felt personal. Everything felt personal, like she was shutting me out on purpose." I was quiet for a moment, trying to figure out what I should say next. "Is this because of work? Or is it me? If I'm doing something You're not doing anything." She cut me off, her voice suddenly sharp. You're just making this into a bigger thing than it is." I opened my mouth to say something, but the words got stuck. I felt myself sinking deeper into confusion. I couldn't get a grip on this. Everything was slipping through my fingers. I stood up, trying to steady myself. I wanted to say more, but I didn't know how. Instead, I asked quietly, "Do you still want this?" "Us?" Her eyes met mine then, colder than they'd been in a long time. She didn't hesitate. "You have no rights over me." The words hit me like a slap, even though she'd barely raised her voice. I froze. For a second, I couldn't breathe. No rights over her. The way she said it made me feel powerless. Like I was nothing to her, just someone who was there, but not really part of her life anymore. I opened my mouth again, but nothing came out. I wanted to scream, to ask why, to make sense of it, but my mind couldn't keep up. I could feel the blood draining from my face. She didn't even look at me as she stood up and walked out of the room, leaving me there, staring at her empty seat, completely stunned. That night, I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, but sleep wouldn't come. The silence between us had never been louder. I wanted to say something, confront her again. But how do you fight for something that feels like it's already gone? I wasn't sure what I was even fighting for anymore. In the end, I stayed quiet. I didn't know what else to do. The weight of what she'd said hung in the air between us, suffocating. but I couldn't bring myself to push again. Not yet. Something told me that if I tried to push any harder, it would be the last time she ever opened up to me. I wasn't ready to let her go. At least, not yet. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just sit back and accept that this was where we were. Something inside me kept telling me that if I tried harder, maybe she'd snap out of it. Maybe she'd realize what we had and remember why we were together in the first place. So, I started making an effort. I made her favorite dinner one night, lasagna with the extra cheese she always liked. I even opened a bottle of wine, the kind we used to drink when things were good, the kind that made her smile. But when she sat down at the table, she barely glanced at the plate before pushing it aside. She took a sip of her wine and stared at her phone. "It's good," she said, but it was hollow, like she was saying it just to get it over with. I didn't let it show, but I could feel the frustration building in me. We haven't spent much time together lately. Maybe we could plan something, a weekend getaway? Just us. She looked at me, her eyes blank. I don't know. I've got work to catch up on. Her tone was flat, like she wasn't even really hearing me. I can take care of it. We can go somewhere quiet. You need a break. We both do. I pushed, trying to keep my voice steady. She shook her head. It's not the right time, okay? I've got deadlines, things to do. I bit my lip to keep from saying something I'd regret. I could feel the coldness creeping in deeper, the space between us stretching further. The more I tried to pull her back, the more she seemed to slip away. A few days later, I tried again. I came home early from work, hoping maybe we could do something together, watch a movie, talk, anything. I even picked up her favorite takeout, the one she used to beg me to get on a random Wednesday when we were in the mood for something special. She didn't even look up when I set the bag down on the counter. "You're home early," she muttered, still on her phone. "Yeah, I thought we could—" I stopped myself. It felt like the words weren't even worth saying. I thought we could hang out for a bit. She didn't respond, just shrugged, and that was it. I stood there for a second, not sure what to do. I tried to stay calm, to give her space, but the silence was unbearable. It was like I wasn't even here, like I didn't exist in her world anymore. Over the next few weeks, I kept trying, making small gestures, hoping for any sign of warmth. I'd leave her notes in places she'd see them, little reminders that I was still here, still cared. I'd send her texts during the day, asking how she was doing, hoping for something to break through the wall she'd built. But every attempt felt empty. Every time I reached out, it was met with indifference. She'd respond with a thanks or a fine, but there was no real connection, no effort to meet me halfway. And I started to wonder if I was just being ignored, if I had become some kind of afterthought in her life. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was like I was a ghost to her, there, but not really present. I had no idea if this was something I could fix. I just kept pushing forward, still trying, still hoping she would wake up and remember who we were. But with each passing day, the gap between us grew wider, and I couldn't tell if I was fighting to save something that was already gone. There were nights I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the sound of her breathing beside me somehow making the distance feel even more real. And I couldn't help but wonder if I was the only one still holding on to whatever it was we had. It was late one night, maybe a little after midnight, when I overheard her. I was in the living room, trying to focus on a book, but barely managing to read a page. My mind kept circling back to everything that had been happening, her distance, the coldness, the silence. I couldn't escape it. Then, from the hallway, I heard her voice, soft at first, as if she was trying not to be heard. I didn't think much of it. She had friends, right? But as I listened more closely, I realized it wasn't just a casual chat. "She thinks I'm going to work this out with him," she was saying, laughing under her breath. "He doesn't have the guts to leave, though. He's trying to fix something that can't be fixed." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I froze, heart hammering, every muscle in my body tense. I wanted to move, to confront her, but I stayed rooted to the spot, unable to move. She went on, her tone detached, almost bored. "It's pathetic, really. He's just trying harder and harder, like I don't see it. I'm not interested in him anymore, but I don't have to tell him that." My blood ran cold, the bitterness in her voice. It wasn't just indifference. She was mocking me to someone else. She wasn't just pulling away from me, she was enjoying watching me flounder. I could feel the betrayal burning in my chest, choking the air out of me. "I've got it all figured out," she continued, as if it was no big deal. He'll never leave. He'll just keep trying until he's too tired to care anymore. And then I'll be the one who gets to walk away clean. I couldn't breathe. I'd been so focused on trying to fix things, trying to rekindle whatever had been lost. But all along, she'd been playing a game I hadn't even realized I was part of. I couldn't bring myself to move, couldn't bring myself to leave the room. I felt like I was suffocating, like my entire world was collapsing in on me. My mind raced, replaying everything. The moments I'd felt her slipping away, the moments I'd tried so hard to fix, to prove that I was still here, still worth fighting for. And in the end, she'd been waiting for me to give up, just like she thought I would. I thought about how I'd been bending over backward to make her feel wanted, to make her feel like I was still her partner. But I'd been nothing more than a convenience to her. She didn't want to fix anything. She didn't care about us. She was just waiting for me to get tired enough to walk away so she wouldn't have to. A heavy weight settled in my chest. I felt stupid, betrayed, like I'd been walking around blind for months. I hadn't been working through a rough patch. She'd been checked out, emotionally manipulating me into doing all the heavy lifting. I'd been the fool trying to fix something that never stood a chance. I didn't know what to do with this new reality. The thought of leaving her didn't even feel like an option at that moment. It felt like surrender. But I wasn't going to keep playing her game. I couldn't, not anymore. I sat there in the dark, listening to her laugh with her friend, and the world felt like it was spinning out of control. I couldn't decide if I was angry, sad, or just numb. I thought about the marriage, about everything we'd been through, and the pieces of us that had shattered. There was no going back from this. I wasn't going to beg for someone who had already made up their mind. She'd been done with me for a long time, and somehow I'd never seen it. For the first time in a long while, I started thinking seriously about ending things. I didn't know how or when, but I couldn't stay in this dead zone of emotional manipulation any longer. It was time to move on, but I had no idea what that would even look like. Would I confront her about what I'd overheard? Or just quietly start untangling my life from hers? One thing was clear, though. I wasn't going to sit here and let her control the narrative anymore. I wasn't going to let her walk away with no consequences for the games she'd played. The next day, I couldn't think straight. I'd overheard everything. My entire world felt like it had been turned upside down, and I didn't know how to handle the wreckage. I knew I needed someone to talk to, someone who wouldn't judge me, who could actually help. So I reached out to Alex, an old college friend of mine who'd become a lawyer after school. We hadn't kept in touch much, but I'd always known I could count on him if things ever got bad. When we met up at a coffee shop that afternoon, I could barely get the words out. I just sat across from him, silent for a moment, trying to process what I was about to admit. He gave me a long look, waiting for me to speak, but I couldn't figure out where to start. So I just blurted it all out. "She's been emotionally manipulating me," I said, my voice low. "I've been trying to fix things, trying to reach her, but I've been the only one trying. And I heard her on the phone last night. She's not interested. She's been checked out for months. And now I think she's been playing some kind of game with me." Alex didn't interrupt. He just nodded, his face hardening as he listened. It felt like I was unloading everything I'd been holding inside for way too long. It wasn't easy, but it was like hearing someone else say it made the reality clearer. "Do you think it's over?" he asked once I finished, leaning back in his chair. I shrugged, trying to seem indifferent. But it was obvious I wasn't fooling either of us. "I don't know. I mean, part of me wants to fix it, but the other part, I'm done. I'm tired of being treated like I'm invisible. Tired of trying to convince someone who doesn't care." Alex thought for a moment, tapping his fingers on the table, then met my gaze. "If you're serious about ending things, you might want to look into filing for an annulment. It sounds like she's been emotionally manipulating you for a while, and an annulment can help protect you from her, especially if she's been working an angle like this for months." I froze at the word. Annulment? The idea felt like a slap in the face, like I was officially giving up on everything I'd ever believed in. But at the same time, it made sense. The marriage had become a lie, something I was holding on to out of hope, but not reality. "Yeah," Alex said quietly, watching me. "It's cleaner than a divorce. And if she's trying to manipulate things in her favor, you don't want to be left in a position where you're being made out to be the bad guy." I felt a sharp knot form in my stomach. I'm not sure I'm ready to just walk away, though. This is all happening so fast. He nodded, understanding. I get it. But listen, man, you're already being dragged through it by her. You need to think about protecting yourself. I'm not saying jump into it right now, but if you're really done, you've got to take steps to make sure she doesn't use you as a punching bag in the process. I sat there, feeling the weight of his words. He was right. I had no clue what I was dealing with or what kind of game she was playing, but the idea of her pulling me into some kind of emotional war with no end in sight, it was exhausting, and I knew I wasn't the one in control of the situation anymore. Start documenting everything, Alex said, pulling me out of my thoughts. Texts, emails, conversations, anything that shows the emotional manipulation. I can help you with that, but the more evidence you have, the stronger your position will be. I nodded slowly, processing his advice. The idea of turning my life into a paper trail felt strange, but I knew he was right. I needed to protect myself from whatever she was planning next. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. Okay, I said, finally meeting his eyes. I'll start gathering stuff. But I don't know where to go from here. Alex leaned forward, his voice low. You don't have to figure it all out right now. But don't let her walk all over you, not anymore. You've got to make sure you're ready for whatever's coming next. I let out a long breath, feeling the clarity hit me like a wave. I wasn't going to sit around anymore, waiting for her to make the first move. It was time for me to take control. Even if I wasn't sure what I was doing yet, I knew one thing for sure. I was done being her pawn. I left the coffee shop with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. The path ahead wasn't clear, but at least now I knew I had options. I wasn't just going to sit back and let everything fall apart. I was going to fight, on my terms. For the next few days, I acted like everything was fine. I didn't want to show her that I knew what she'd been saying behind my back, or how I felt about it. I kept it together, keeping up the routine we'd fallen into. She didn't notice the change in me, not right away. Her behavior stayed the same, cold, distant. But every so often she'd throw out these small gestures, like when she sat closer to me on the couch or gave me a quick peck on the cheek before bed. At first, I thought maybe it was a sign of her coming around. Maybe she was starting to care again, seeing that I hadn't completely given up. But the more it happened, the more I realized these were just acts, her way of testing the waters, I guess. And it didn't take long before I saw through it. The warmth felt hollow, calculated, like she was just throwing breadcrumbs my way to keep me from realizing she was already planning her escape. One night, she asked if I wanted to go out for dinner. It was a simple enough question, but I saw through it. I knew she wasn't asking out of a desire to reconnect. I couldn't ignore the feeling that it was just another way to keep me hanging on, hoping for something that wasn't there. I agreed, though. I didn't want to make it too obvious that I was already mentally checked out. Over dinner, we talked about mundane things, work, a friend of hers who had just had a baby, the weather. But there was nothing real between us, not anymore. The whole conversation felt like I was speaking to a stranger, like I was going through the motions, trying to keep up appearances while everything inside me was unraveling. I tried not to think too much about what she'd said to her friend. It felt like a betrayal, like I had been living a lie for so long that I could hardly remember what the truth looked like, but I couldn't help it. Every time I looked at her, I saw someone who wasn't mine anymore. She had been gone long before I realized it, and now I was just the last person to know. After dinner, I went to the bathroom, trying to clear my head. When I came back, she was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, detached as usual. I watched her for a moment before sitting down beside her, my heart heavy in my chest. I couldn't keep doing this. The more I tried to ignore what had been happening, the more it ate at me. I started documenting everything. Small things, conversations, texts, even her strange behavior at home. It wasn't much, but I knew I needed to build a record of what was going on. I wasn't sure how things would play out, but I couldn't risk being blindsided again. I knew the next move would be crucial. I needed to make sure that if she was truly planning her exit, I wasn't left holding the bag. I couldn't let her paint me as the bad guy. I wasn't going to be the one who got left behind without a fight. I spent hours late at night, sitting at my desk, reviewing everything I had. The evidence was building, slowly but surely. Text messages that were just as distant as her disinterest in anything beyond herself, the moments I'd caught her flat out ignoring me, acting like I wasn't even there. It all painted the same picture, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Every day felt like a countdown. I couldn't help but wonder what would happen if I confronted her now. But part of me was still unsure. Was it worth confronting her before I had everything in place? I couldn't afford to make a misstep. If she was playing me this whole time, I couldn't just go in blind. I kept my distance watching her, weighing each small interaction carefully. She'd give me just enough to keep me from walking away, but I knew it wasn't real. It wasn't enough. I was getting ready. I was mentally preparing myself for what I had to do next. I didn't know how it would unfold, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to sit back and let her dictate how this ended. This time, it was going to be on my terms. I could feel the tension in the air as soon as I walked into the living room. She was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone, just like every other night. Nothing had changed, and that was the problem. It had been building up for so long, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The moment had arrived. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I wasn't going to get emotional. I wasn't going to get sucked into her games. "I'm filing for an annulment," I said, my voice calm, steady. She looked up at me, not even flinching. The shock hit her face a second later, followed by confusion. "What? An annulment? Are you serious?" I nodded slowly, not backing down. "I'm serious. I've had enough of this. I'm done." Her eyes widened, but then she quickly masked it with that blank expression I'd grown so familiar with. "Wait, no. This is just a phase, right? You're just upset. We can work through this." I shook my head. "No, it's not a phase. I've been done for a while. This isn't working, and it hasn't been for months. I'm filing for an annulment, and it's already in motion." She stood up abruptly, her face flushed with disbelief. "You can't be serious. We're married. You're just going to throw everything away because of some stupid fight? This is just a misunderstanding." I held my ground. "It's not a misunderstanding. You've been emotionally checked out for months. I've been here, trying to make it work, and you've been gone. This has been coming for a long time." She shook her head, her voice rising. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We've been through rough patches before, but you've never done something like this. You can't just end our marriage over nothing." "I'm not ending it over nothing," I said, my voice firm. "I'm ending it because I've tried everything, and you've made it clear you're not interested in fixing anything." For a moment, there was silence. She stood there, staring at me, her lips pressed together. Then, slowly, her demeanor shifted. The shock faded, replaced by something colder. Her posture straightened, and I could almost see the wheels turning in her mind. "You know," she said slowly, her tone ice cold, "this is all on you. You're the one who's giving up. I didn't want this to happen. You're the one walking away from our marriage." Her words hit me like a slap. She was trying to flip the script, turn the blame on me, like I was the one who had failed. "You're trying to make me the villain," I said, my voice low, each word cutting through the tension between us. "But you've been checked out. You've been making it clear for months that you didn't want this anymore, and now you want to make it my fault?" She crossed her arms, a tight smile creeping onto her lips. "You don't get it, do you? You've been so busy trying to fix things that you couldn't even see what was happening. I've been done for a long time, but I didn't want to be the one to leave. I wanted you to be the one to make the decision, and now you're going to sit here and pretend like you're not the one breaking this all apart?" Her words stung, but I didn't let it show. I had heard enough. She had been playing me. She'd been waiting for me to pull the trigger so she could sit back and make it look like it was my choice all along. "No," I said, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling up inside me. "This isn't your game anymore. I'm not playing along. I'm done. This is happening, and I'm not changing my mind." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she let out a sharp laugh, a cold, empty sound that didn't reach her eyes. "You think this is the end of it?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You think you're just going to walk away from me like that? You don't even know what you're doing. You have no idea how much I've been holding this all together." I shook my head, finally letting my own frustration show. "You've been holding nothing together. You've been playing games, and I'm done being your pawn." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't say anything else. The silence between us was heavy, thick with the realization that everything between us was finished. I stood there for a second longer, taking in the empty look in her eyes, the coldness that had replaced anything I'd once known. The finality of it hit me like a weight. "Goodbye," I said, turning toward the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had already made my decision, and nothing she said now would change it. The weight of the conversation still hung heavy on me as I went to bed that night, but I couldn't sleep. My mind raced, replaying everything she'd said. how she'd tried to flip the narrative, make me the bad guy. I couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd looked at me, so cold, so calculating. It was clear now. This had never been a rough patch to her. She had been planning her exit for months, and I was just the last one to figure it out. I couldn't leave it there. I needed to know what else she had been hiding. I started going through her stuff the next morning, her phone, her emails, whatever I could find. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed to protect myself, to understand what kind of game she'd been playing. At first, I didn't find anything that stood out, but then, buried in an email thread I shouldn't have been looking at, I saw something that made my stomach drop. It was a chain of emails between her and one of her friends, a woman I didn't know well but had met a few times. They were talking about me, about us, but not in the way I had ever imagined. She'd been confiding in her friend about how she was setting things up to make it look like I was the one who was emotionally abusive. She'd been working on fabricating evidence, fake diary entries, manipulated text messages, everything she needed to paint me as the villain. The words jumped off the screen, and my chest tightened. I felt like I couldn't breathe. This wasn't a rough patch. This wasn't even a mistake. She'd been plotting this for months. I read through more of the emails, my hands shaking. She'd been working on it piece by piece. Every lie, every manipulation, every little detail. And I was too blind to see it. There were references to fake apologies, plans to create incidents that would show me in a bad light. And worst of all, there were voice memos, her friend coaching her on how to act during a confrontation to make sure it looked like I was the one in the wrong. I felt sick, betrayed. No wonder she had been so distant. This wasn't about work or stress. This was a calculated, cold plan to get what she wanted, something I hadn't even known I was losing. I spent hours combing through her digital life, every message, every piece of evidence I could find. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep this went. She wasn't just trying to get out of the marriage, she was preparing for a legal battle. She was setting me up to look like a monster, to have me discarded and thrown under the bus while she walked away with everything. I couldn't let this happen. I had to do something. My first instinct was to confront her with what I'd found, but I knew that would be a mistake. She'd just lie, deny it all, and turn the situation around again. I needed a plan. I thought about the people I knew who could help, and that's when I reached out to Derek, an old college buddy of mine who had gone into cybersecurity. I hadn't spoken to him much in recent years, but he was a tech genius and had helped a few of my friends with personal security issues in the past. I explained everything to him over the phone, the emails, the voice memos, my growing suspicion that she had been planning this from the start. Derek listened without interrupting. He told me he could help pull more data, something I couldn't access myself. I arranged to meet him the next day. When I walked into his office, I could already feel the weight of what I was about to do. He was going to dig through her digital footprint, and if everything I suspected was true, this would be the proof I needed to protect myself. It took hours. Derek worked through her accounts, pulling files, combing through messages, and tracing hidden data. By the time it was done, my hands were clammy. The evidence was overwhelming. It wasn't just fabricated diary entries. She had set up fake conversations between us, altered text exchanges to make it look like I was being controlling and manipulative. She had even staged some of the incidents I'd thought were normal arguments, twisting them into something much darker. Seeing it all laid out, in black and white, made everything crystal clear. This had never been a misunderstanding or a rough patch. It was all part of her plan. She was going to play the victim, and I had been her pawn. I sat there in Derek's office, my mind reeling, but one thing became crystal clear. I wasn't going to let her manipulate this situation any longer. She had already planned her next move, but now I was ready to make mine. I left Derek's office with everything I needed to take legal action. I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed or get away with destroying me. She had underestimated me, and now I had the power to fight back. I knew this wouldn't be easy. It was going to be a long battle, and the truth wouldn't be easy to prove. But I wasn't going to stand idly by anymore. The game had changed, and this time, I was the one in control. The moment I walked into the mediation room, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. I had arranged the meeting under the guise of discussing the annulment, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just about the legal process anymore. This was my chance to expose everything, to take back control and show her for who she really was. I walked in first, settling into the seat across from the mediator. He was a calm-looking man, probably in his late 40s, with a neutral expression that didn't give away much. He glanced at me, then at the empty seat across from him. The door opened and she walked in, just like I knew she would. Her hair was perfectly styled, her face set in that familiar indifferent mask. She was expecting this to be just another negotiation, another way to finalize things on her terms. She barely looked at me as she sat down, keeping her eyes focused on the mediator. She had no idea that the game had already shifted. "Thank you for meeting today," the mediator said, looking between us. "We're here to discuss the annulment, clarify any concerns, and see if we can reach an agreement on how to move forward. I'll facilitate the conversation." She nodded, her eyes flicking to me briefly, but not with any real attention. I knew what she was thinking. This was just a formality. She'd been manipulating me for months, and now she'd get to walk away with everything. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I waited a few moments, then took a deep breath and pulled the folder I'd brought with me across the table. I wasn't going to get emotional, wasn't going to let her control this moment. This was business. "I've got some evidence I'd like to present," I said, my voice calm but firm. Her eyes flashed with a brief flicker of concern, but it was gone before she could hide it. "I think you should see this," I continued, turning to the mediator. I handed over the folder, and he opened it, his brow furrowing as he began to look through the documents. At first, it was the text messages, harmless on their own. But when you saw them alongside the voice memos, the context became clear. I watched as the mediator's eyes went wide, then slid over to my wife, who was now visibly tense, shifting in her seat. "You might want to look at these too," I said, sliding the next piece of evidence across the table, the fake diary entries. The ones she'd written to make it look like I was a controlling, emotionally abusive partner. Her face went pale. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. She was trying to compose herself, but the weight of the evidence was already sinking in. "You've been planning this for months, haven't you?" I said, keeping my voice even. "Manipulating me, lying to everyone, including yourself. You've been setting me up to look like a monster while you played the victim." She was shaking her head now, her eyes darting to the mediator, then to me, searching for a way out. "No, this isn't," she stammered, her voice breaking. The mediator cleared his throat, looking at her with a measured expression. "Ma'am, we've reviewed all of this, and the evidence is clear. This isn't just a misunderstanding. You've been actively manipulating these texts, these records. You've been working with someone to fabricate a story. We can't ignore that." The room fell silent. My wife's face flushed, but it was a mix of embarrassment and fury. I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to make herself the victim in a story she'd already twisted. She started, but she faltered, the words not coming out right. I cut her off before she could try to turn the tables on me. "It's too late for that. I'm not here to fight over who did what or who's to blame. I'm here to protect myself. This annulment is happening. Today. Whether you like it or not." The mediator looked between us, his face serious. He didn't say anything for a long moment, but it was clear he was processing what had just unfolded. Finally, he looked at me and nodded. "We have what we need. Based on the evidence, I'll be filing the annulment request today. There won't be any further discussion. You've shown intent to deceive, and the truth has been laid out clearly." I looked at my wife one last time, my eyes not softening. This was over. "I'll be signing the paperwork after this meeting," the mediator continued. "I'll ensure everything is finalized, and there won't be any need for further litigation. We'll move forward with the annulment as requested." I stood up, my hands steady as I grabbed my bag. The weight in my chest was heavy, but not in the way it had been before. This wasn't relief. I wasn't walking away with some false sense of peace. I knew what she was capable of. But this was a victory. She didn't say anything as I walked out. She couldn't. Her story had fallen apart. And as I stepped out of the room, I felt the grip of her manipulation start to loosen. I wasn't just walking away from her, I was walking away from the person I used to be, the one who'd been dragged through this mess. I wasn't the fool anymore. I was free. A few weeks had passed since the annulment, and I was still processing everything. I hadn't expected to feel this way, but there was a sense of relief that I couldn't shake. I woke up every morning without the weight of her lies hanging over me, without the constant pressure to keep pretending everything was okay. It felt like I could breathe again, really breathe. The house felt different now, emptier, but in a way that wasn't suffocating. It was quiet in a good way. I spent my evenings sorting through things I hadn't touched in months, getting rid of the clutter, clearing out the old. I was starting over, bit by bit. I didn't know when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, I'd stopped reacting emotionally. I'd stopped being the guy who would yell or beg or break down. That wasn't me anymore. The guy sitting in this house now was someone who had learned how to think clearly in the face of chaos. I hadn't given in to her manipulation. I'd played the game strategically, and I'd won. Even now, looking back, I still couldn't fully wrap my head around how I'd let it get so far. How had I missed it all? The signs were there, clear as day. The coldness, the distance, the way she'd pulled away without saying a word, all the while setting me up to be the villain in her story. But I hadn't seen it. I hadn't wanted to see it. I didn't know what made me keep going, keep fighting for a relationship that wasn't there. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was the belief that love could fix anything. But in the end, it was the fear of being alone that almost kept me from walking away. That fear had paralyzed me. But once I'd crossed the line, once I'd seen the truth, I realized I was stronger than I thought. What struck me most now wasn't just the fact that I'd escaped the situation. It was how much control I'd taken back. I hadn't let my emotions take the lead. I'd planned, I'd executed, and now I was free. It was like standing on solid ground for the first time in a long while, the fog lifting, and I could finally see a future that didn't have her in it. I wasn't sure what was next. Maybe I'd date again one day. Maybe I wouldn't. The thought didn't scare me anymore, and that was something. But for now, I was focusing on myself, on rebuilding, on getting to know the guy who'd been buried under her manipulation for so long. I was no longer defined by her lies, by her games. I was starting over, and this time, I was doing it on my terms. It was like reclaiming a part of myself I'd lost. I was in control again, and that was enough.